Hello YouTube. One of the bigger recent Elder Scrolls tragedies in my opinion is the story of the Elder Scrolls Legends, a legitimately pretty good Elder Scrolls spin-off which gave us absolutely amazing official art of many of the races and characters of the series. And it had really good gameplay to boot. I mean, it wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but it was a quality game which unfortunately never truly managed to capture an audience like the other games in the strategy card game genre like Hearthstone. But that led Bethesda to eventually stop supporting the game in 2019 after switching the game's developers did not really seem to have worked out and the game seemingly didn't really reach its targets. Now, I always had a lot of fun with the game, especially with its single player stories, as they're some of the better written stories in the entire Elder Scrolls series with some interesting lore implications. I mean, its Sheer Gordath Shivering Isles expansion comes with a story which is easily within my top 5 Elder Scrolls stories of all time. That story is just that good in my opinion. And its Clockwork City expansion would finally reveal what happened to the Clockwork City after Sothasil disappeared. Now, by now I've covered all of the game stories on this channel over the years, and today I spliced all of them together into this one long form lore video for you to watch, with timestamp chapters in case you want to skip any of the stories or skip this intro. So, first let's start with the game's main story, the only story to come with the game at its release, set during the final years of the Great War, after the intro. So, the Elder Scrolls Legends' main story starts out somewhere in the year 174 of the 4th era, in the final years of the Great War. At this time, the Altmerry Dominion had conquered large parts of Cyrodiil, and to many it seemed obvious that it wouldn't be long until the Empire would be forced to surrender. The game itself starts somewhere in Dominion territory, where the story begins the same way as almost any other game in the series, with the protagonist finding themselves in imprisonment. The prison cell the hero is in is part of a complex filled with Daedra, and the Daedric commander, named Reeve, throws the protagonist into a fighting pit, pitted to fight against a fellow prisoner for the entertainment of the Daedra. The hero's opponent is a Nord named Tyr, and he doesn't really want to fight, but rather he wants to work together to escape the captors. The Forgotten Hero and Tyr team up, and they fight their way through the hordes of Daedra in the complex, and they eventually make their way to their commander Reeve, who, as you defeat him, rambles something about Lord Narafin, the overall commander of the Altmerry Dominion troops in Cyrodiil, and that Lord Narafin is planning to fulfill some Daedric culling prophecy on Cyrodiil. Tyr then reveals to you that he's one of the agents of the Blades organization and wants to investigate exactly what this culling prophecy is, because with the Empire already on the back foot in the war, something as ominous sounding as that could prove to be the final blow. Now, Tyr decides that the best first step to take is to find an old friend of his, a dark elf sorceress named Lanneth, who specializes herself in the Daedra and their magic, and thus she might know more about this ominous sounding prophecy. Now, the road to Lanneth is filled with peril, as the two heroes get ambushed by bandits who want their gold, gets ambushed by wolves who want to eat them, and get ambushed by Altmerry soldiers who were looking for a Blades member who escaped captivity. That Blades member that they were looking for is revealed to be Tyr, indicating that indeed the Altmerry Dominion is working with the Daedra that you just escaped earlier. Now, after a long and tiring journey, they finally reach Lanneth's house, which is suggested to be somewhere in the south of Cyrodiil. But surprise surprise, Lanneth isn't there. But you know who is there? More Daedra, and some mortal Daedric cultists waiting to ambush the two heroes. Now, after Tyr and the Forgotten Hero defeated these ambushing Daedra and their cultists, they interrogate one of the cultists, who then reveals that the sorceress has been kidnapped by them and has been put on a ship towards the Imperial city in order for her to help Altmerry commander Lord Narafin to bring about this mysterious culling prophecy, against her will I should add. So Tyr and the Forgotten Hero decide to go after them. They hope to catch up to the cultists who had captured Lanneth by secretly boarding a smuggler's ship bound for the Imperial city. Now, as is becoming a bit of a pattern in this story, anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and first they are spotted by the smugglers who own the ship and they are forced to fight them, only to then stop fighting them and help the smugglers when they find a common enemy, as an Altmerry Dominion patrol comes to inspect the smuggler's ship, which, you know, both don't want, because the smugglers don't want their goods to get taken, and Tyr doesn't want to be killed as one of the Blades. For their help in fending off the authorities, the smugglers allow for them to sail with them, and they then start to sail northward towards the Imperial city. Unfortunately, it isn't smooth sailing for them, literally, as not only do they find themselves in a really bad storm, they also get attacked by pirates and are then shipwrecked. However, at this point luck finally starts to turn on our party of heroes, as they soon find that the cultists that were shipping Lynette north also got caught up in the storm and seem to have shipwrecked as well. Now, Lynette, who had been looking for an opportunity to escape, had used the chaos of the shipwreck to free herself. She had killed the remaining cultists and then fled into the forest on the mainland. Now, after fighting off some of the forest creatures together, the party finally gets to talk with Lynette, who reveals that she'd learned that the Daedra and their cultists were working for Lord Narafin, who was planning to use the Daedra culling prophecy to deal one final blow to the Empire, and also kill almost all of the human population of Cyrodiil, likely to clean the land for the elves to resettle there after the war. Now, she also reveals what exactly this culling prophecy is, and it's a bit complicated. You see, by the 4th era, after the sacrifice of Martin Septim at the end of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, technically Nirn, the sort of planet Tamriel is on, should be safe against invasions by the Daedra from Oblivion. However, from the side of Tamriel, a door to Oblivion can still be opened to summon Daedra, to serve you with Daedric summon spells. So, while Oblivion can no longer invade Tamriel on their own initiative, Tamriel can still open the door for the Daedra. That being said, opening said door apparently costs a lot more energy, or has become somehow more complicated since Martin's sacrifice, it seems. And that is where the culling prophecy comes into place. Because what Lord Narafin is planning to do is to sacrifice all non-elf inhabitants in the Imperial City, likely by siphoning off their life energy or something, although that aspect is never really truly explained, in order to open a lot of doors to Oblivion, to Cyrodiil, which would then spawn a lot of Daedric creatures, which could then overrun Cyrodiil and kill all the humans and put a final end to the Empire's resistance against the invasion. Having learned this, the group, now including Lynette and one of the Argonian smugglers from earlier named Swims at Night, who just kinda decided to stick around for vibes, I guess, since his ship was destroyed anyway, so he didn't really have anywhere to go. This merry band of heroes decides that the best course of action is to warn the Emperor of Narafin's plot. But the Emperor at this time was kind of a hard man to reach, as at this point he now commands his troops from Skyrim after the Imperial City got taken by the Altmeri Dominion, so the group decides to travel even further north to Skyrim. After some more trials and tribulations, among which was a fight against some Imperial deserters who tried to kill them, the group encounters one of Tyr's old associates, a legate of the Imperial Legion named Cassia, who had been roaming the wilds with her soldiers in order to hunt down deserters. After Tyr tells her of what they know, Legate Cassia and her men immediately escort them to the Emperor. The group then tells the Emperor everything that they know, and the Emperor is horrified by this new information. Now, those of you who know a thing or two about the Great War know that at this point in the story, likely around the year 174 of the 4th era, the end of that year, the Empire wasn't doing super well. They had lost almost half of Cyrodiil to the Altmeri Dominion, and they had amassed enormous losses after somehow the Altmeri Dominion seemed to know exactly what the Empire was going to do with every turn, ambushing their legions around every corner and preventing counterattacks before they even got underway. So let's just say that the Empire was pretty desperate at this point and pretty close to surrendering, and I really recommend watching my old remastered video on the Great War if you want to know exactly how desperate they were. That video is in the description, by the way. It gives a good overview of the greater situation on the continent during this story. Now, the Emperor decides that if Lord Narafin's plan would be allowed to come to fruition, it would be the end. Not just for the war, but also for Cyrodiil itself, and possibly also the other human provinces, considering, the Altmeri Dominion's goal of bringing back Elvish dominance to the continent. So even if the Empire was in a state where it should surrender and any plan would be doomed to fail, a last-ditch effort to retake the Imperial City and prevent Lord Narafin from executing his plans had to be undertaken. So, a quick plan is hatched, and the Emperor and his staff are going to recall as many of the remaining troops from every front and every reserve that they have to call for an all-out last-ditch attack on the Imperial City. Meanwhile, a secret scouting party would infiltrate the Imperial City and try to find out as much as they could about how Lord Narafin had been able to predict the Empire's every move so far. Obviously, our hero and his merry band, now strengthened by Legate Cassia, are picked to be this small strike team, and this infiltration attempt is actually quite successful, since the Argonian smuggler, who stuck around for vibes, knew a lot of smuggling tunnels, which even the Imperial Legion and the Altmeri occupiers did not know about. This included a tunnel from a place close to the Imperial City Arena right to the Imperial Palace in the White Gold Tower, where Lord Narafin had his command post. So, our merry band of heroes posed as arena fighters to gain access to the city, and they then slipped into the old smuggler tunnel. They sneaked through the palace towards Narafin's study, where they were shocked to find the legendary Daedric artifact. and the source of the Altmeri Dominion's incredible foresight, the Orb of Vermina, a Daedric artifact which allows one to view any place on Nirn from a distance. This explained everything about the Dominion's strange advantage, and the Forgotten Hero tried to quickly slip the Orb of Vermina into their bag in order to bring it to the Emperor. But just as they were about to quietly leave again the way they came, Lord Narafin entered the room, together with the Daedric commander Reeve from earlier in the story. After a quick skirmish, Reeve manages to put his blade at Tyr's neck, threatening to kill the man if the Forgotten Hero does not return the Orb of Vermina to Lord Narafin. The player then gets to make a choice: keep the orb, which you then get as a pretty good card for your deck, or give the Lord to Narafin, which frees Tyr and also get his card for your deck. But if you do that, if you free Tyr, Tyr then quickly grabs the orb and shatters it before Narafin can react. Now, no matter what happens, the mission to take away Narafin's advantage is successful, as either Tyr dies and you have the orb, or Tyr lives and he shatters the orb, so Lord Narafin no longer has the orb. So then our band of heroes, with or without Tyr, fights their way out of the Imperial Palace, defeating Reeve in the process and getting his blade, the blade Goldbrand, which is also a legendary Daedric artifact of the Daedric Prince Boethia. Interestingly, this blade and Reeve's dialogue are the final hints that we get that it was indeed Boethia, Daedric Prince of Plot and Cruelty, who was working with the Altmeri Dominion to bring the Culling Prophecy to fruition, as Reeve admits during the fight to serve Boethia. Now, what exactly the Dominion offered Boethia in exchange for their help, I don't know. Either way, the band of heroes fights their way through the Imperial City, likely using old smuggler tunnels to escape. When they return to the Emperor, who's now camped out in northern Cyrodiil with his troops, they find out that Altmeri Dominion assassins had infiltrated the Emperor's camp and had killed his guards in an attempt to murder the Emperor himself. However, our band of heroes arrives just in time to put down the assassins. The Emperor, however, is gravely wounded in this skirmish, and while he will survive the ordeal, he's in no shape to walk or much less fight, which is quite detrimental to the attack on the Imperial City, as the gathered troops at the camp were supposed to start retaking Cyrodiil the next day, and not having the Emperor among the troops would likely be very bad for morale in an already very demoralized army, which presumed itself to be in a disadvantage. So the Emperor then asks the Forgotten Hero for a favor. He asks the hero to wear the Emperor's armor and pretend to be the Emperor during the attack on the Imperial City to keep up morale, so the troops think that the Emperor is fighting alongside them. The Forgotten Hero agrees, and the next day the assault on Cyrodiil begins, starting the Battle of the Red Ring, the final battle of the Great War. Without the Orb of Vermina in the Dominion's hands, the Empire could properly attack for the first time with the element of surprise. And as you can see in my video on the Great War, within a few days they retake the city and crush the Altmeri Dominion's troops around the city. At the very end of the battle, as the Legionnaires are fighting their way into the city, the game's protagonists are on the front lines, making their way to the Imperial Palace, where they catch Lord Narafin in a last-ditch effort to activate the Culling Prophecy. The heroes then fight Lord Narafin in the final battle of the game, and defeat him, preventing the Culling Prophecy from being fulfilled. The Forgotten Hero then celebrates his victory in the Emperor's armor along with the troops, but soon would quietly leave the city, after which the Emperor himself would return to the public. Because of this switch, the actions of the Forgotten Hero would come to be forgotten by history, earning him the name of Forgotten Hero. And that was the main story of the Elder Scrolls Legends, and I have to say I personally really like this story, although I do know that many people don't like that it added the whole Orb of Vermina and Daedra thing, which kind of made the Altmeri Dominion seem weaker than it was and the Empire stronger than it was in Skyrim's lore. While I understand that perspective, I personally kind of disagree, because we already knew that the Altmeri Dominion had to be a bit smaller in terms of army size than the Imperial army, and we know that the High Elves are far more skilled in magic than most humans and have far more knowledge on all things Daedra. So while I get the sentiment that it changes some things about the war and that isn't all too fun, it really isn't out of character in my opinion. But hey, that's just me. Let me know what you think in the comments. But now let's move on to the second story in the game. The game's first story expansion, which released in April of 2017, The Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, in which we can experience the Dark Brotherhood's downfall before the events of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Now, I'll give a bit more lore context to the story first, so first cover the events leading up to the story, then I cover the story that's in the game, and then I connect it to the Dark Brotherhood story of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Now, I have separate timestamps for the lore part and the story in the game part, just in case you just want to know the story in the game, but I think the lore is pretty integral to understanding the story, so that's why I tell it. Before we delve into the main reasons and events that led to the Brotherhood's downfall, I need to explain how their disintegration even began. At the end of the Third Era, the Dark Brotherhood's presence in the predominantly human provinces was still somewhat solid, but its presence in Cyrodiil was still partially crippled due to the Oblivion Crisis and the events that transpired in the Dark Brotherhood questline in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, where the Brotherhood lost a large part of its leadership and the new listener, the hero of Kvatch, eventually disappeared after the events of the Shivering Isles. As the Cyrodiil branch of the Dark Brotherhood slowly started to recover in the early 4th era, the Brotherhood was hit with a lot of misfortune, and then later in the era, the Great War commenced, and as we all know, the Great War crippled and brought destruction to many of the human provinces of Tamriel, High Rock, Skyrim, and especially Hammerfell and Cyrodiil. They all suffered heavy damages due to the sheer severity of the war. And this degree of chaos allowed for many insurrections and riots to start within the cities and countries of these provinces, not to mention how major political players were using the war in order to target unwanted factions. One of these unwanted factions being the Dark Brotherhood. Even before the war, the Mede Empire had presumably been hunting the Brotherhood, using the Penetus Oculatus, essentially the Empire's CIA/Secret Service, to hunt down their members and trying to find sanctuaries to destroy. Because we know that the Dawnstar Sanctuary, which we occupied during the events of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, was actually forcibly abandoned during the 1st century of the 4th era, meaning that even then the Brotherhood was facing very tough challenges, presumably including them being hunted by the Penetus Oculatus. All of this tension burdened the Dark Brotherhood greatly, with sanctuaries in Bravil, Bruma and Chedanal all taking on a lot of pressure from local riots in Cyrodiil, and other sanctuaries across Tamriel being raided by the Imperial Penetus Oculatus forces. The Brotherhood's presence in Hammerfell fell first, as the sanctuaries there were all presumably destroyed, either by riots or by the new Hammerfell government, or maybe even Imperial Penetus Oculatus, which were maybe still being allowed to hunt the Dark Brotherhood by the new independent Hammerfell government, depending on how political relations were at the time. No matter how the sanctuaries got destroyed, these sanctuaries' loss was a huge loss of influence and power for the Dark Brotherhood, them having to relocate surviving members of Hammerfell and losing control over an entire province. Their subsequent loss of power and control came with major setbacks, as they didn't have the resources to keep up important facilities such as the Shadowskill training facility in Archon in Blackmarch. This facility was abandoned, and with its abandonment the Shadowskill tradition began to wither as well. If you want to know what shadow skills are, they are highly trained and highly skilled Argonian assassins, on whom I'll have a video for you next week, so stay tuned for that. And if you are here a few weeks after the upload date of this video, then that video will be in the description of this video. So check that out if you're interested, or stay tuned depending on when you're watching this. So if you want to know more about the shadow skills. So, in the year 186 of the 4th era, the sanctuary in Bruma was besieged and completely eradicated, leaving almost no survivors. This started an even bigger trend of loss, as all remaining sanctuaries across Tamriel started to suffer similar fates. And by the end of the year 187, a very bad year for the Brotherhood, only 4 sanctuaries remained in all of Tamriel. These were the main Brotherhood headquarters in Chedanal in Cyrodiil, the Wayrest Sanctuary in High Rock, the Corinth Sanctuary in Elsewhere, and the Falkreath Sanctuary in Skyrim. During this time, Cicero in his journal complains that it's becoming harder and harder for the Brotherhood to hold up the illusion of being able to be everywhere at once, with contracts in Hammerfell, Valenwood and Blackmarsh becoming harder and harder to complete due to the lack of sanctuaries and lack of members. It was also during this time that the Black Hand, the leadership of the Dark Brotherhood, was basically fighting over what to do with the Brotherhood, either try to expand again or try to consolidate, and it seems that in that fight, amongst themselves they lost valuable time, as the Brotherhood would fall even further later. But the 4 sanctuaries that remained after all this time seem to have been the toughest ones, surviving many of the Imperial hunts and riots. But how did all of them eventually crumble, so that we are only left with the Falkreath Sanctuary? Well, during the Elder Scrolls Legends storyline Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, a merchant by the name of Uther Near hired the Forgotten Hero, the protagonist of the Elder Scrolls Legends, to infiltrate the Dark Brotherhood and lead him to the Listener. Uther claims that his motivation for this task was the fact that his own daughter killed her mother for the Brotherhood and got recruited by the Listener herself as a result, and that he wanted revenge on the Brotherhood. Soon enough, the Forgotten Hero infiltrated the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary in Wayrest, and through a series of assassinations, earned the trust of the Brotherhood. As said before, during this time the Dark Brotherhood was really yearning for new members, as their downfall was becoming very apparent, so getting in wasn't very hard. As time went on and the hero was undercover in the Dark Brotherhood, in the year 188 of the 4th era, a fleet of Corsair pirates attacked the city of Wayrest while the hero was still undercover in the Brotherhood. During this massive pirate raid of the city, they laid waste to a lot of the city of Wayrest and the Dark Brotherhood sanctuary included. On that day, when the Wayrest sanctuary was lost, the Black Hand, the leadership of the Dark Brotherhood, decided that the Corinth sanctuary in Elsewhere would also be closed, and that all its members would be relocated to the Chedenol headquarters of the Brotherhood in order to bolster their strength in Cyrodiil. With these events essentially happening at the same time, the Dark Brotherhood lost major control over both High Rock and Elsewhere, having to vacate both provinces in a desperate act of survival as their members were lost over the provinces due to all of the misfortune that I told you of before. Due to the destruction of the Wayrest Sanctuary, the Forgotten Hero and Uther plan to infiltrate the Falkreath Sanctuary next, knowing that they'll welcome the survivors of the Wayrest branch with open arms, as even there they had problems recruiting new members. At first, nothing really significant happens during the hero's stay in the Falkreath Sanctuary, but once there, the hero does meet the current listener of the Dark Brotherhood, who decides to visit the sanctuary in Falkreath. The current listener is called Alison Dupre, and I personally really like her. Anyway, as becomes apparent during your contracts in Falkreath, there's a traitor amidst the Brotherhood members in Falkreath. Alison then gives you the opportunity to find out who the traitor is, which the hero uses to gain her trust. Once the traitor has been taken care of, Alison realizes the hero's potential as an assassin and then offers him to accompany her in Bravil, where the Night Mother's crypt is located. They return to Bravil to find that two rivaling skooma trafficking gangs are waging war against each other on the city's streets, and due to the political state that southern Cyrodiil was in during this period, the direct aftermath of the Great War, southern Cyrodiil was left largely uncontrolled by the authorities, because it was during this period that the Thalmor were likely removing their forces out of the region and the Imperial forces were moving back in after the signing of the White Gold Concordat. That, in combination with a shortage of Imperial forces directly after the war, because a lot of them had been slaughtered at the Battle of the Red Ring, means that there wasn't as much control in the city, so skooma trafficking gangs could go wild. But as most Oblivion players know, the crypt of the Night Mother herself was located below the Lucky Old Lady statue in Bravil, and the statue was unfortunately destroyed in the gang war soon after Alison and the hero entered the city. During all of this, Russia, the speaker of the Chedenol Sanctuary, sent two assassins called Garnak and Andronica to assist the listener in Bravil. During all of this, the hero's original employer who had them investigate the Brotherhood, Uther Near, appears in Bravil and asks the hero to meet him in secret. After learning that the listener is also in Wayrest, Uther asks the hero to lead him to the listener so he can finish the job and end her. Alison, on the other hand, has learned of his presence in Bravil and went on to explain to the hero how Uther is her father and that she swore to kill him because he murdered her mother. Now, when Uther and his mercenaries are led to the crypt, they start pillaging and burning everything. Both Andronica and Alison are killed during this skirmish, and the player can choose to either help Uther kill his daughter or protect Alison. Regardless, Alison dies at the hands of her father, and the crypt of the Night Mother is destroyed in the process. Although Garnak was heavily wounded, he managed to evade the mercenaries and evacuate the Night Mother's coffin. He transported the Night Mother in her coffin to the Chedenol Sanctuary and told of the horrors that transpired in Bravil. At that moment, the Brotherhood was without a listener, and this worried the members gravely. They proceeded to wait for the Night Mother to speak to someone and name a listener so that new contracts could appear. But after 2 months, she still didn't seem to pick anyone. This made people very impatient, seeing as how the organization around them was slowly crumbling further and further. The speaker of the sanctuary, essentially the leader of the sanctuary, then revived an ancient tradition which allowed for the appointing of a keeper. A keeper would be responsible for the sole upkeep and protection of the Night Mother, something that usually was done by the listener, but since there was no listener, a keeper had to be appointed. The Black Hand chose Cicero for this role, and it would be up to him from that point to care for the Night Mother's remains. And from this point forward, Cicero slowly descended into madness. Before his role as keeper, Cicero was an assassin for the Chedenol Sanctuary. He seemed capable and composed, showing a certain degree of ruthlessness that every good assassin possesses, but still very much sane in the mind other than that. Cicero committed himself to the role that he was given, and even more time went by before more problems arose. Russia, the speaker and leader of the sanctuary, claimed that the Night Mother finally spoke to him, yet he was unable to confirm this by saying the binding words, which were the words that were taught to every listener and keeper. This uncovered Russia's blatant lie, and with Cicero's insistence, Garnak then killed Russia for his betrayal. With Russia dead, only Cicero, Garnak and Pontus were left as members of the Chedenol Sanctuary. Pontus eventually died at the hands of some common bandit while roaming the streets of Shadenal, and soon after, Garnek supposedly left the sanctuary in search for supplies, but when the 3-month mark passed, it was clear that he just disappeared or died. This left Cicero as the last Dark Brotherhood member in Cyrodiil, and alone with the Night Mother. At this point, his sanity dwindled quickly, and he accepted the personality of some jester that he had assassinated before he became the Keeper. His duties towards the Night Mother forced him to flee the Shadenal Sanctuary, and he contracted Astrid from the Valkyrie Sanctuary to announce the Night Mother's arrival to Skyrim. Now, throughout the Dark Brotherhood questline in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, we learn of Astrid's fatal jealousy and lust for control once the player is named the Listener. Angered by the fact that she had to abdicate from her own appointed position of power, leads her to informing the Penitus Oculatus about the Emperor's assassination attempt. As expected, this was a direct betrayal of the 5 tenets of the Dark Brotherhood, the creed of the Dark Brotherhood, and she eventually suffered the same consequences of her actions when Commander Morrow went back on his word and raided the Valkyrie Sanctuary. Anyway, some members do survive, and you help them relocate the abandoned sanctuary in Dawnstar if you chose the path for the Dark Brotherhood, and the player then can choose to rebuild the Dark Brotherhood sanctuary in Dawnstar. But this might not be the definitive outcome, as the player can also join the Penitus Oculatus and kill the entire Dark Brotherhood when you're in the sanctuary. Still, there is an out for the Dark Brotherhood, as the Dark Brotherhood can still rise after Skyrim, even though it has been destroyed, as there are no active sanctuaries left if you join the Penitus Oculatus. Because even when you raid the sanctuary, the Night Mother is nowhere to be seen, because if you raid the sanctuary with the Penitus Oculatus, then the Night Mother never arrived, because Cicero hadn't arrived yet. This means that the Dark Brotherhood could still rise from the ashes and start anew, considering how the Night Mother would still be intact with Cicero, even if the sanctuary was raided before Cicero's arrival. In addition to that, several members aren't even there when you raid the sanctuary. The Dark Brotherhood fell from grace by the time that we encountered them in Skyrim. They went from a far-reaching empire and a network of assassins across the entirety of Tamriel to essentially just one misguided sanctuary in the forests of Valkyrie. But even then, as long as the Night Mother endures, so will the Dark Brotherhood. So we'll likely see them in the Elder Scrolls 6. And that is the story of the fall of the Dark Brotherhood. I have to say, I really appreciate them giving us this story of the Brotherhood's downfall, especially with them seamlessly integrating the story with the stories that we find in Cicero's journal in Skyrim, which really makes this story feel almost like a prologue to Skyrim. Really cool. Alright, next up let's talk about the next story expansion of the Elder Scrolls Legends, released in November of 2017, the Clockwork City DLC, which is called Return to the Clockwork City, and this DLC gave by far the most interesting new lore in its story of the 4 stories, as it answered the mystery of what happened to the Clockwork City after Sotasil's disappearance, and more interestingly, how Sotasil prepared for the fact that the city would have to go on without him. Let's talk about it. The Clockwork City is one of those places which set the Elder Scrolls universe apart from most other fantasy universes. The concept of a living god, in this case Sotasil of the Tribunal, creating his own miniature mechanical realm to simulate the real world and then live in it with all his followers by shrinking everybody down, is a pretty unique concept. Sotasil essentially created a mechanical biosphere the size of maybe half a human, with a whole livable world inside of it, filled with mechanical and synthetic flora and fauna, all created by the living god himself. The entire city was powered by his divine power. Everything created in it was created at his will and in a strive for perfection, a perfection not found on Tamriel, as it said that the city itself might even partly reside inside a separate realm. This made it possible to create all sorts of mechanical life within the Clockwork City and replicate many of the things Tamriel has, but in perfected form, all powered and thought up by Sotasil's divine energy and intellect. But what happens to a city like that, which is completely dependent on the living god and his power, when the living god is not around for a while because he has business somewhere else, or in a bad scenario loses his power, or maybe even dies? The city would immediately stop functioning, and this is something that Sotasil himself also realized. So that is why in his initial designs of the realm he built a so-called low power mode, in which many systems are either shut down or working on half capacity. This way the city could still be powered whenever Sotasil was in his hibernation chamber for extended periods of time, or in the case that his power would one day wane. But what if his power, or he himself, were to disappear completely? What if he were to be cut off fully from the source of his power, which was the heart of Lorkhan? Or what if he would die? Well, initially Sothasil never really took his own death into account when designing the city, that is, until the return of Dagoth-Ur. When Dagoth-Ur, the antagonist of the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, returned, he cut the Tribunal off from their divine power that was derived from the Heart of Lorkhan by occupying the Heart Chamber and blocking the Tribunal from renewing their godly powers at the Heart. The day of Dagoth-Ur's return, Sothasil realized that the Heart of Lorkhan was too important, not just for the Tribunal and their godly powers, but for everybody that depended on said power, including all of his followers that lived inside the Clockwork City, powered by him. Without his power, the city would fall into disrepair and would become unlivable. So he started looking for an alternative way of powering his own divinity and in extension, his city. In his own words, he needed a backup for the Heart of Lorkhan. So in secret he started to work on his greatest creation yet. A mechanical Heart of Lorkhan, a replica so to speak. In the Clockwork City he had already proven that he was able to recreate a model life and land in his way. But this would be something completely different. This would be an undertaking of far more difficulty. It would be the most daunting task that he'd ever undertake. His replica heart would perhaps be not as powerful as the godly original, or perhaps he would indeed find a way to perfect even the Heart of Lorkhan in the process and build a more powerful one, if he put his mind to it. But all that mattered in the end was that the heart would be powerful enough to power his own city and keep him powerful enough to maintain it and his divinity. He worked on his mechanical heart in secret, deep within the Cognitum Centralis, a part of the Clockwork City that only Sothasil has access to and where he would often disappear in for many years, not seen by his followers. This chamber, hidden deep within the Cognitum Centralis, he would call the Chamber of Lorkhan, and he would work on the mechanical replica of the Heart of Lorkhan for hundreds of years, from the return of Dagoth-Ur all the way up until his very death at the end of the Third Era. Work on the mechanical heart was tedious to say the least. The raw power that he conceived while constructing it was unstable and several times even threatened to destroy him and the entire Clockwork City. But over time he managed to bring the raw power of the mechanical heart under control, and he was able to start working the heart in order to one day complete the systems that would allow him to take the power of the heart and use it for the power of his city and for himself. He'd already worked on the heart for several hundreds of years when the day of his death came. In the Elder Scrolls Legends it's revealed that Sothasil knew of his impending doom, as his fellow Tribunal member, Almalexia, in her final madness came to the Clockwork City to murder Sothasil. He already knew that his fate would be death, and he had prepared for it. In his final moments he fought with Almalexia, knowing that he would lose, but in those final moments, all that he could do was stall for time. The systems that would allow him to make use of the heart's power were not ready at that time, so he had to use whatever power he had left in himself and in his body and in his mind to defend against Almalexia, because he had a reason to try and stall for time. Because when he learned several years before that Almalexia intended to kill him, he had started working on automated systems which would be able to use a very small part of the raw power emanating from the heart in order to keep functioning after his death, and then work on the systems which would allow the heart to eventually power the entire city and all the other machines. He managed to complete the systems which would work on the heart just in time. However, those machines, after powering up, needed more time to seal the chamber with the mechanical heart in it until it would be finished. That seal would make the power emanating from the heart undetectable and would make the chamber inaccessible to everybody until it would be finished, so that Almalexia would not be able to claim the heart for herself and try to use the destructive power for herself. 22 minutes. That was the time left that the systems needed to seal the chamber of the heart until it was finished. 22 minutes, that's how long Sothasil needed to stall Almalexia. And he succeeded, as the replacement heart was locked away until it would be finished and ready to power the entire city for the rest of eternity. It would take 207 years for it to be fully finished by the automated systems. 207 years in which the city needed to prevail somehow without their god's power. Sothasil died, and Almalexia was killed by the Nerevarine in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, and the Clockwork City was lost to history. Not many knew how to access it, and without Sothasil and his knowledge and academia to lure new knowledge seekers there, the city started to decline. Many of its inhabitants likely fled to the outside world. After Sothasil's death and the sealing of the mechanical heart, the city was, presumably for a while, completely without power, with literally all its systems being offline. But, likely several months or maybe years, The automated systems working on the mechanical heart managed to complete the first phase of the systems, which would allow to control the power of the heart, which then allowed the city to at least start operating again on an extremely low power mode. Vital systems needed to keep what remained of the population alive likely restored first, allowing them to continue to live. But not many had remained in the city. After Sotaciel's death, many of the inhabitants of the city had left. Only a few apostles, which were Sotaciel's most dedicated followers, actually remained in the city. They likely had a harsh life. Without the power of the god, food must have been very scarce and survival must have been really hard. But their waiting would eventually be rewarded, as when the basic systems once again powered up, it would probably allow them to start growing synthetic crops again and have some vital machines run again. This group of followers was so small that the little power that they had was enough to just barely survive on for many years. With the city lost to the rest of Tamriel, this group of followers were the only ones to witness the decline of the city. Due to the systems being without power, vegetation from the outside somehow found its way into the city, and over the ages made several buildings in the city crumble and be overgrown with vines. But the city endured, and over the years more and more systems got back online as the automated systems working on the heart further completed their work. The city continued to operate on low power, but at least continued to operate. The remaining Clockwork apostles actually continued to live inside the city and followed the ways of Sotaciel, completely secluded from the outside world. That is, until the year 201 of the 4th era, supposedly in parallel with Skyrim's main questline. It was at this time when an old apprentice of Sotaciel, a dark elf named Mercenar, sought entrance into the city. Mercenar was a dark elf with great intellect, and he was even recognized and taught by Sotaciel himself for a while. But eventually the living god had cast him out of the city centuries prior, because he had undertaken very unethical experiments on his fellow apostles and other inhabitants of the Clockwork City, creating abominations, as Sotaciel called it. Mercenar at this time sought the artifact which continued to power the city in the 4th era, long after Sotaciel's death, as he had heard rumors that the city was still functioning, and presumed that he could use whatever was powering the city in order to turn himself into a living god, equaling Sotaciel at the height of his power. In the Elder Scrolls Legends, you as the Forgotten Hero tried to stop Mercenar. You either do this by harnessing the power of the heart yourself after the automated systems finished, or by destroying the heart before Mercenar has taken full control. If you decide to destroy the heart, the Clockwork City stops functioning for good, and even the last apostles following Sotaciel's ways are forced to leave the city in search for a new life, as the city becomes uninhabitable. If, however, you decide to use the power of the heart, you get overwhelmed by the power, and unfortunately then the Forgotten Hero dies themselves. But the sacrifice of the Forgotten Hero, which is you, the player, then allows the population of the Clockwork City to once more power all systems in the city fully, giving them a future and allowing those that were still following Sotaciel's way to live inside the city for centuries to come, and perhaps even for eternity. And that was what happened to the Clockwork City after Sotaciel's death. I think by far my favorite part of this story was the Sotaciel missions, and how it showed you that he expected Almalexia to come for him, and thus he prepared for his own demise. Really cool. Anyway, now let's talk about what I think is by far the best story expansion for the game, released in early 2019, the Shivering Isles expansion, Isle of Madness, in which you don't play as the Forgotten Hero, but you play as someone named Talim Rend, a dark elf on a mission. The plot twists in this story are amazing, and I would almost recommend playing it yourself before watching this, if when you're watching this the servers are still online for the Elder Scrolls Legends to even download the story, but hey. But still, you would be spending money on a dead game, so maybe just watch this, but trust me, the story is worth it. So if you want, I'll give you the voucher to stop watching now, play the game. Really, this story is amazing. Alright, let's talk about it. So, the story I will tell you today is the story of Talim Rend, a Dunmer who, for reasons we'll cover up shortly, ends up in the Shivering Isles. Talim is an old Dunmer, once a spy in service of the Empire, likely a part of the Blades, as he lived in Morrowind at the time. As a side note, this means that this story likely plays somewhere before the Oblivion Crisis in the 3rd era, when the Blades were still powerful and served the Empire, and before the hero of Kvatch, the hero from the Oblivion game, went into the Shivering Isles in the DLC. Now, for some reason, the wikis both categorize this story as setting place in the 4th era. I don't really get that, since the story itself takes place in the 3rd era, at least as far as I can tell. But the narrator who narrates the story in the Elder Scrolls Legends likely is in the 4th era, so A bit of a grey area there, but this story likely plays in the 3rd era. But take that with a grain of salt as other people think otherwise, but yeah. Anyway, the specifics of his spy involvement and the time and place don't really matter, as Talim left behind his life as a spy at some point when his son Novos was stricken with some illness of the mind, which he calls a terrible madness. He travelled all across of Morrowind and sought help from all that he could think of, from the temple to Ashlanders to even some Outlander healers. But none could heal Novos's mind, and every day Talim got more desperate, so eventually he started looking into the taboo and forbidden practices of Morrowind, to see whether there was a cure to be found for his son's madness, some forbidden knowledge which could perhaps help him. This is where our story picks up, as he sets out to make a bargain with Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness, and to do so he travelled to the Shivering Isles in order to seek out the Daedric Prince of Madness personally. Upon entering the Shivering Isles, the realm of Sheogorath, he is stopped by a Bosmer thief named Cyril, who tells him that he can't travel to the palace of Sheogorath as there's a gatekeeper which he needs to pass first, which can only be defeated by a weapon from the Garden of Swords. So Talim travels to the Garden of Swords to find a weapon which can defeat the gatekeeper. He then manages to defeat the gatekeeper, and upon entering New Sheoth Palace he encounters Haskell, Sheogorath's aide and chamberlain, who tells Talim that Sheogorath thinks that he is too boring to even have a conversation with, so he needs to go and prove himself to be amusing in the Shivering Isles, so that Sheogorath will talk to him. Talim is obviously annoyed, but he leaves the palace in order to prove that he's amusing, and he does so by helping out several people in the Shivering Isles, curing them of their madness or helping them with their problems. Two of whom are the Bosmer thief Cyril, who he encountered at the beginning and, as he discovered, ran off with his money, and the other one is an orcish bard named Luzra Groshar, who has a certain tune in her head which she can't repeat, but it's still stuck in her head, but she can't repeat it because some creatures named Gemites are actually keeping the notes away from her, which are some creatures from Sheogorath. Now, helping out these people all entertain Sheogorath to no end, and he's now happy to see Talim. But once Talim asks him to make his son sane again, Sheogorath has this to say.
You want me to do what? I'm the Daedric Prince of Madness. I don't make people sane. I'd have to be crazy to do that. And I am crazy, so I'll do it. But here's the bargain, mortal. You want me to make one person sane? You've got to bring 3 people around to my side of the coin. You understand? 3 lovely broken minds for one boring whole one. Oh, that's fair, isn't it? Given that you're desperate and I'm mean. You have a deal.
So, Talim sets off to make 3 people mad, but fortunately Talim didn't have to make all those people mad on his own, as the people that Sheogorath chose to be turned over would not be easily swayed to madness, so Sheogorath assembled a team of ragtag good doers for Talim, consisting of Cyril, the thief who robbed him earlier, and the orcish bard, both being threatened by him that he would dismember them if they didn't help him. Anyway, 3 people to turn to madness for Sheogorath, and the first one is a Khajiit named Zanar, a former assassin which Talim and his band of allies turn over to madness by having him haunted by the people that he'd killed in the past. The next victim is called Baron Navir, a spoiled man who's never wanted for anything and thus became greedy. In order to turn him to madness, Talim played on his ego, making him believe that he has mystical powers. He does this by making the Baron believe some nonsense that he just made up came true, like his Quama eggs laying golden eggs and having it snow in the summer. He then believes he is the Prince of Prophecy and decides to go and fly off a cliff. Needless to say, he can't fly, because the only reason he had powers is because Talim and his band of good doers, they turned the eggs gold and they made it snow, so the Baron didn't have any powers and thus falls to his death, which, ironically, of course, amuses Sheogorath. Now, someone who isn't amused is the bard Luzra, who decides to leave Talim and his quest because she thinks that they are going too far, rather be dismembered than having to actually kill people for Sheogorath. Now, the last victim that Sheogorath chose was, in my opinion, the most interesting one, Imperial Spy Master Portia Loran, Talim's old boss from when he worked for the Blades. Talim obviously doesn't want her to turn to madness, as he knows that she's a good person, which is obviously Sheogorath's aim, but Talim decides not to doubt himself and his quests, pressing on and deciding that in order to cure his son, even a good person could be sacrificed. So he and his remaining crew members, Cyril, seek out Spymaster Portia, who's busy collecting intelligence on the Reachmen, who are plotting something sinister according to the intelligence that they had gathered. Now, Talim decides that in order to drive Portia to madness, he needs to plant some false evidence which may lead to her entire unit to die out, making Portia feel that she failed and thus driving her to insanity. Cyril is disgusted by this plan, and like Luzra, she leaves Talim, leaving him alone to complete the job for Sheogorath and alone to save his son. Talim goes through with the plan, and his plan succeeds, and by coverting letting Portia believe that he found some sort of cure to her Reachman poison, he has her sending her men into death. And it wasn't just her men that died, also a lot of innocent bystanders in the form of priests. This drove Portia ridden with grief and turned her into madness for Lord Sheogorath. So, 3 souls down, 1 left to cure. So Talim traveled home to find his mad son and bring him to Sheogorath, but when he comes home, he finds his house empty. Shocked, he turns to a neighbor who is confused and asks him what happened to his memory, because she tells him that his son Novos has been dead for more than a year now and that she was the one that helped Talim bury his son. Talim then rages in his anger as he decides that this must be a mind trick by Sheogorath, and in rage he travels back to the Shivering Isles, but as he came closer to the palace at New Sheoth, Talim kept losing more and more of his sanity as he mindlessly murdered all the Daedra who stood in his way to the palace, as Sheogorath refused to see him and released his golden saints upon him. But Talim overcomes the guards, but continues to lose his entire sense of self, ranting to Sheogorath all the way, even killing innocent creatures on a mad rage to find the Plains of Madness. He starts to forget who he is, and for a time he thinks he's Vivek, or perhaps the Baron, or anyone who isn't Talim Rand. He then kills a mudcramp merchant and a gnarl in his madness and in his anger, and he gets lost, terribly lost in the Shivering Isles, until someone finds him, Luzra, the Orcish bard, whom he nearly attacks as first he thinks that she's a Gemite, but upon almost killing her he hears the same tune that he had to use to cure her madness all the way back when he first entered the Shivering Isles, and suddenly a small part of himself returned. Luzra then helps him clear his mind a bit, and together they set out to find out what Sheogorath did to Talim. Then, in order to force the Prince of Madness to actually reveal what was happening, they sought out Dias of Metheria, who most of you will probably remember from Oblivion, as he was once the librarian and chamberlain of Jiggalag, Daedric Prince of Order, and the former shape of Sheogorath. You see, for the people that don't know, the other Daedric princes feared the power of Jiggalag, Daedric Prince of Order, so much that they conspired to transform him into that which he hated most, the essence of chaos itself, Daedric Prince of Madness, Sheogorath. That's kind of the origin story of Sheogorath, for those who don't know. So, Dias told Talim to find the Sword of Jiggalag, an artifact which Talim would be able to use to bring the memories of Order come back to Sheogorath, which Talim could use to force Sheogorath to do his bidding, as Sheogorath, being the essence of chaos, could not stand order, and thus memories of order would drive him mad. Or sane, or whatever you would do to someone who is already so crazy and mad. And thus Talim sets out again for the confrontation with Sheogorath. Together with the Orcish bard, he finds the Sword of Jiggalag and then makes his way back to New Sheoth Palace, where now he can enter. And once there, he speaks to Sheogorath. And the truth is finally revealed. Because Sheogorath tells him that Talim already once came to him, unable to live with the memories of his dead son. He begged the Prince of Madness to take away his memories of his dead son because he couldn't live with him. Sheogorath at the time agreed, but only if Talim turned 3 people to madness. A deal was made, and Talim forgot everything about his son being dead and set out to turn 3 people into madness, but Sheogorath tricked him. Because with some of Sheogorath's influence, suddenly Talim believed himself to be on a mission to cure his son of madness, meaning that in every scenario, if he turned the 3 people to madness, he would once again discover that his son was dead, and Talim would have still grieved for his son, for the Daedric Prince of Madness is a deceiver in all bargains. Then with the power of Jiggalag's sword, Talim forced Sheogorath to restore his original memories, because he'd rather know what happened to his son than live in this eternal unknown. It was revealed that when Talim was still working for the Blades, they had attempted to infiltrate the Worm Cult. Something went awry on the mission, with, depending on the player's choice, Talim either being forced to kill the child himself, or the Worm Cult killing the child. And then this is how the story ends.
Unable to withstand his own terrible memories, Sheogorath relented He restored my memories and lifted the cloud of madness from my mind. I also made him promise to leave Luzra and Siriel in peace. In exchange, I promised to leave the Isles forever. I return home now to nurse my grief, and perhaps in time, to plot my revenge on the Cult of the Worm. My warning to you, then, is this. There will always be a devil seeking a bargain, promising to take away your pains. Do not trust them. The past may be the heaviest burden, but it is our burden to bear.
That story was amazing. A dark tale without an happy ending, but a really good story, and stories like these really make me so sad that Bethesda gave up on this game, as it really shows some of the storytelling potential with a linear story in the Elder Scrolls universe. But unfortunately they did give up on the game. Although I do hope that some new Elder Scrolls spin-offs in the future will give us more linear short stories with cool art and animated cutscenes, as that was in my opinion by far the best part about this game. Anyway, those were the stories in the game, and to be honest, they were really good. I mean, compared to something like Skyrim, where most of the in-game stories aren't that great, I mean, don't get me wrong, some of the stories in Skyrim are really good, but some of them are just, they don't have much depth. I mean, the gameplay of Skyrim is legendary, and the freedom in the game is amazing, but some of the stories really could use some more depth, some better characters, that kind of thing. And that's something that this game did really, really right, and I'm sad that they gave up on it. Oh well. Anyway, I really hope that you enjoyed this collection of stories, and if you did, why not subscribe to the channel and return for my regular short form Elder Scrolls lore content. I make these lore videos basically every week, and if you made it this far into the video, why not comment under this video what your favorite flavor of ice cream is. Not only will it confuse people in the comments and will make me know that you watched the entire video, but it will also perhaps give me some inspiration for the future instead of my usual chocolate and coffee flavor ice cream. Oh well. Thank you for watching, and I'll maybe see you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video, if you make the choice to subscribe to the channel and return for the next one, of course. And otherwise, goodbye. See ya.